Hi everyone, I hope you all are doing well. In the previous tutorial, we talked about DOM and understood what it really means. This tutorial is pretty much hands-on, and we will create a JavaScript library that is built purely on DOM to show remaining characters for the input and text area fields. And you can use this library across any projects. And if you want to build your own libraries, then this tutorial will serve you as a starting point. Let's first understand why we need such a library at the first. So I have created a simple form here. It has several fields and there are max length defined on some of these fields. So if I try to type in something in here, it would not let me type in as soon as we encounter the max length. So I'm just typing in here so that the max length gets triggered, and as we can see, it's even if I'm trying to type in something, it's not letting me type in. Same with this field, where do you live in? So it's not letting me typing in after the max length has been encountered. So as a user, I don't know how much length do I have to fill in these fields. So what we want to do here is we want to show some sort of character count which keeps track of how many characters I have typed in already. Instead of writing a custom logic for each of these fields, we will create a DOM library. And the library can be used across any of your projects, and we don't have to bother about how this HTML file has been written. We will directly work with DOM to show the character count here. This is the HTML file that I have written, and as you can see here, there is max length defined on some of the input and text area fields. So in order to create the reusable library, I will first create a JavaScript file, char remaining count.js and char remaining count.css. We will add the CSS later to this CSS file. Now let's go back to this JavaScript file and we will create a function config char count, and as a user of this library, I just need to go to my HTML file and import this script. So script src is equal to char remaining count.js, and then I just need to invoke this function. So script config char count, this function config char count, and that's it. As a user of this library, I just need to do these two things and it will take care of the rest. Now let's go back to this JavaScript file. The first step is to wait for the content of the DOM to be loaded. So we will attach an event listener to the window. So window.add event listener, and we will type DOM content loaded, and then the second argument is the callback function. So this is the callback function, and here we will create a private function. So we will do const initialize is equal to function, and we will call this initialize function once the DOM content has been loaded. Within this initialize function, we want to first add this CSS file to the DOM. So I'm going to write a private function here. So const add CSS is equal to function, and within this initialize function, I'm going to call this add CSS function. So add CSS. Now let's write this add CSS. So const head is equal to get document.get elements by tag name. So this will give me all the head elements. I should expect only one head element, but if you type div here, this would give all the div elements in the DOM. So let's write head back. The next step is to create the link element. So const link equal to document.create link, and this is the name of the element, so it would be link here, and I want to add two attributes to this link element. The first one is set attribute rel, and this would be style sheet. The second attribute is the href, and this would be char remaining count dot css. So the second parameter is the path to this css file. Now that I have created the link element, first I will check if there is a head element. If there is one, I'm going to grab the first head and I'm going to append child. And if there is no head element, then I'm just going to append the link element to this document. So append child link. This is just a worst case scenario in case someone has forgotten to return head element within the HTML file. So this step is done. Let's go back to this initialize function. Before I write anything else, let's first fix the mistake that I've made. On line number 6, it should be document.create element and not document.create link. So if you want to create any element, it should be document.create element and the name of the element that you want to create. Now that we have written this add CSS function, the next step is to grab all the input and text area fields that have max length defined. So we are going to do document.query selector all, and we would pass the selector here. So it would be input and the brackets, and within the brackets you type in the attribute. So I want all the input fields that have max length attribute defined, or I want text area fields. So we would separate all these selectors by a comma, and then all the text area fields that have max length attribute defined, and this would return an array. So we would run a for loop for each, and for each of the element we are going to create a div element. So I'm going to write a new function here, const create char remaining element is equal to function, and then here I'm just going to do const char element is equal to create this function, and then I would pass in this attribute, this element here. So element, and within this function let's create the element const character element is equal to document dot create element, and we want to create a div element. So I would do div, and I would return this character element. And let's set some attribute to this element, character element. So character element dot set attribute, and I would do class, and let's do char remaining count. So we would define this CSS to this we would define this class to this CSS file later on, but let's first complete this function and then we'll go back and write this class within this CSS. So the next step is to set the text content. So text content would be the remaining characters. So I would create another function, const remaining characters is equal to function element, and this would give me return element dot get attribute max length. So this would give me the max length attribute defined on this element, and I would minus the length of the value. So I would just do remaining characters on this element, and let's go to this CSS file and define the classes. So I would write dot char remaining count, and let's define color. It should be blue, and the text align should be right. And we also want to show remaining characters text. So I would do char remaining count and then after, and the content should be remaining characters. Let's go back to the JavaScript file, and now we need to append this character element after the input element. So we want to insert this div element somewhere here right after this input field, and for text area it would be right after this text area field. So we can do that by calling element. So this element would give me the input or the text area field, and then we would get the parent node, and that from the parent node we would insert before, and then the first parameter to this insert before method is the element that you want to insert. So it would be character element, and the second parameter or the argument is the reference node. So we want to insert before this dot next element sibling. So we can do element dot next element sibling. That's it. Let's test it out, this code. So let's go back to this HTML file first, and I have modified this HTML file so that the value of this text area is set to I have no comments, and we have other fields for which we have max length defined, but there is no default text. So let's go to the browser, and then I'm going to open this HTML file, and as we can see here, we have this div element being inserted here, and the color of the text is blue. That means that our CSS file is also being picked up, and if you can see here, the last field, the character count is automatically set to 82, because while creating the div element, we are setting the remaining characters here, line number 24. Now let's go back to this page, and if I type in anything here, nothing is happening. This counter is not getting decremented. So that is because we haven't attached any event listener to these fields. So let's do that now. So let's go back to the JavaScript file, and here we want to add the event listeners. So I'm going to create another function, add listener to input, and this would be a function, and I would call this here add listener to input, and I would pass in the element for which I want to add the listener. So I would need to grab this here, and here we will call element.add event listener, and the first parameter is the type of event. So in our case it would be input. So whenever we provide any input to the input or text area fields, we want to invoke this callback function. So the second parameter is the callback function, and here I want to first check if the element has the attribute max length, and we can also do this here because it would refer to this element. So if there is a max length attribute defined, then I would do const next element. I want to grab the next element. In our case it would be this element, div element that we have created, and I would do this dot next element sibling, and I would do next element. Let's make this a camel case dot text content equal to remaining characters, and I would pass in this. So let's go back to this file and let's reload this. Now if I type in anything, we can see that the counter is getting decremented, and as soon as we encounter 0, it means the max length has been achieved. Same here, and this should also work. So this means that our library is working. Now as a user, what if I want to change the color of this text to red? I don't have any configurations currently. So let's write some configurations that we can expose to the user, and user can change the color of this text. So I'm going to pass this config object to this function config character count, and we will go to this char remaining element, and here we will check if there is a config object, and if the config object has color property present, then I'm going to do char element dot set attribute, and then I'm going to set style attribute style, and the style would be color, and this would be config dot color, config dot color, and then let's go to this index.html file and let's pass the color here. So color, and then I want my color to be red, so color red. Let's go back to this page and let's refresh it, and now we can see that the color of this text is red. Now that we have created this library, you can use it across any of your projects. You can host the JavaScript and the CSS on the cloud and let users either download it or use it from there. This is a very simple version of the library, and I recommend you add more features to it. and that would help you learn more. For example, if the user want the text to be bold or want it to be aligned at the center, you can let users pass these configurations. I will share the link to the source code in the description, and in the next video in this series, we will create another useful library. If you like this video, please share it with others, and if you have any questions or suggestions, please let me know through the comment box below, and I will see you in the next video.